The axe came down on the frozen stump. Once. Twice, the head wobbled on its handle, ready to fly loose at any swing. But the woman in the oversized man's coat did not stop. Blood on the snow. Not hers, half a mile away. Green pine smoke rose from the chimney of a ruined cabin, the kind of smoke any mountain man would recognize. The smoke of someone freezing to death without knowing it. Smoke that called wolves. Smoke that called worse things than wolves. On the eastern ridge, a gray-bearded man stood motionless among the blue spruce. 6 years, he had kept one law and one law only: mind your own business. His hand rested on the stock of an old Winchester. His eyes were on the smoke. In the inner pocket of her coat, a black leather book. 19 names. A bridge that fell in October. And somewhere down in the valley, 3 city horses were climbing the mountain. She swung the axe again. The head left the handle. The elk was already dying. Caleb Hurst knew it before he saw it. He knew it the way he knew most things now. Quietly, without ceremony, without needing to be told, the blood trail started thin. A few drops pressed into the snow, already browning at the edges, older than the fresh inch of powder that had come down before dawn. Then wider. Then the stride of the animal changed. He could read it in the spacing between prints, the way the rear hooves began dragging instead of lifting clean. Something inside the animal had given out. It was still moving because animals moved until they couldn't. That was the nature of things on a mountain. You kept going until you stopped. He understood this principle better than most. The trail went northeast, down through a series of switchbacks that dropped toward the narrow ravine he almost never visited anymore. The ravine where old Hector Morrow had worked his claim for 11 years without finding anything worth the effort, and had finally died of mountain fever in his own ruined cabin, alone, which was how most things ended up on this mountain if you stayed long enough. Almost never visited. He followed anyway, because that was what he did now. He followed things, animals, mostly, weather patterns, the logic of the mountain deciding what lived and what didn't. He had been following things on this mountain for 6 years, and he had gotten very good at it. He had stopped asking himself whether getting very good at something was the same as being alive. It was not a question he needed answered. He was 42 years old, and he had the body of a man who had spent those years doing difficult things in difficult conditions and not complaining about either. Big through the shoulders in the way that came from actual work rather than intention. Deliberate in his movement, each step placed rather than landed. A habit so old it had stopped being a habit and become simply the way he moved through the world. His beard had gone the color of river iron in winter, dark gray, shot through with threads of rust, and it was thick enough to matter when the temperature dropped below freezing, which in West Virginia in November happened every night without fail. He wore canvas over wool, over flannel. 3 layers that had been chosen over years of trial and error to produce exactly the right balance of warmth and breathability for sustained outdoor work in cold weather. Boots he had resoled himself twice, not because he couldn't afford new ones, but because these boots had been broken incorrectly, and new boots required time he didn't want to spend. A Winchester Model 1876 with a hairline fracture in the stock that he had pinned with a brass rivet and wrapped in rawhide, which had never once misfired in 6 years of daily use. He did not carry anything he didn't need. He did not keep anything he didn't use. He had learned in 6 years of solitary mountain living to want very little. This had turned out to be significantly easier than he expected, which told him something about wanting, about what it really was and where it came from. And he had decided not to examine that particular finding too closely because the examinations led somewhere he wasn't ready to go. The blood trail led him down through the switchbacks. The ravine opened up below him, a narrow slot in the mountain, south-facing, which meant the spruce on its walls were dense and dark smuts, and the snow on its floor was deeper than the surrounding terrain, because the wind found it and packed it there. The creek that ran through it in spring and summer was frozen solid now, a white ridge down the center of the ravine, floor smooth and still. He was watching the blood trail when the smell reached him. He stopped moving. Wood smoke sharp and wrong, in a way that took him a moment to identify. Too much carbon, not enough heat. The specific, acrid signature of green pine being burned by someone who didn't know what green pine meant in winter, which was that it produced more smoke than warmth, that it smoked like a signal fire, that it would draw every predator within 2 miles and asphyxiate the person burning it before it kept them warm. He looked up from the trail. The smoke was rising from the old Morrow cabin. He stood still and looked at it for a full 30 seconds. Just looked, taking in the information, without immediately deciding what to do about it. The Morrow cabin had been empty since old Hector died 3 winters back. Before that, it had been a prospector's shack, barely worthy of the word cabin. A single room built from whatever timber was close enough to drag, with a chimney that had never drawn right, and a roof that had started sagging before Morrow was cold in the ground. By last winter, the ridge beam had developed a bow in the middle that Caleb had noticed from the game trail above and cataloged as a structural problem that would eventually resolve itself catastrophically. Someone was inside that cabin. Burning green pine in November. The elk could wait. He came down through the blue spruce, on the north slope of the ravine, moving the way he moved through anything unfamiliar, parallel to his objective. Slow, keeping the tree line between himself and the cabin. Not because he expected trouble exactly, because, after Philadelphia, after everything that came after Philadelphia, after standing in a federal courtroom with the best evidence he had ever assembled and watching it mean nothing, after all of that, he had simply stopped moving through the world any other way. You checked the tree line, or you didn't come home. Those were the options. He had seen both outcomes and had preferences. He heard her before he saw her. A rhythmic, furious, deeply counterproductive sound. Metal striking frozen wood, over and over, with the kind of determination that had passed productive approximately 40 minutes ago and become something else entirely. Something more desperate and less effective. The axe head was wobbling. He could hear it in the irregular clank of each impact. The way the sound changed depending on whether the head struck straight or twisted sideways on contact. A loose head, which meant the wedge had worked out, which meant the next vigorous swing might send the head flying in an unpredictable direction, which was a good way to lose an eye. He parted the lower branches of a blue spruce and looked. She was attacking a half-frozen stump with that axe, and she was losing. The axe was rusted, loose-headed and too heavy for the way she was swinging it, all arms. No weight, transfer through the hips and shoulders, which was the mistake people made when they had never been taught and were working from instinct and desperation, rather than technique. She wore a man's heavy wool coat that reached her knees, the shoulders sitting 4 inches too wide for her frame, the hem dragging through the snow every time she shifted position. Her hands were wrapped in strips of what appeared to be torn shirting, improvised hand protection. Even from 40 yards he could see the shivering. The full-body kind. The kind that meant she had been cold for longer than was medically comfortable. He read her the way he read terrain, 30-something. City boots. The heel was narrow and smooth, wrong for this ground, not designed for snow or uneven terrain. She had been post-holing through the snow rather than learning to walk on the crust, which meant she had no experience with winter snowpack, which meant she had not grown up anywhere near a mountain. She was not a prospector. She was not someone who had wandered off a trail. People who were genuinely lost were either frantic or paralyzed. This woman was neither. She was working, furious and exhausted and entirely wrong about axe technique, but working with deliberate purpose. She had a plan. The plan was failing, but it was a plan. Running, that was what this was. She was running from something. And she had chosen this specific location, this particular ruined cabin in this particular ravine, because it was hidden enough to be useful. She hadn't stumbled here by accident. Caleb observed her for a long time. The mountain had one law above all others. Mind your own business. Other people's difficulties had a way of becoming your difficulties if you allowed them sufficient proximity. And in 6 years on this mountain, Caleb had maintained the law with considerable discipline. He had seen trappers come through in bad shape and let them pass without offering assistance they hadn't asked for. He had found an abandoned camp that had been visited violently by a black bear and stripped it to what was salvageable and left the useful items at the game trail junction without waiting to see who came back for them. He had kept his distance from every human problem he encountered because he understood. With the specific certainty of a man who had lived the lesson, what happened when you involved, got invested? You started caring about the outcome, and then the outcome let you down, or cost someone else, or turned out to be just the world being the world, which it reliably was. He had been very good at this law. For 6 years. Then she dropped the axe, not threw it, not set it down with intention. Her arm simply gave out, without warning or drama, and the axe fell, and she went down with it, both knees hitting the snow at the same moment. A sudden collapse that had no performance in it. She sat there in the snow, with her wrapped hands pressed against her face and her shoulders, shaking in a way that was not from cold alone. She was not making noise. That was the specific thing that moved him. A woman performing distress for an audience made noise. A woman who was genuinely at the end of something. Not at the end of her patience or her rope, but at the end of her belief that the current plan was going to work. That woman went quiet. The silence was the signal. He recognized it because he had made that kind of silence himself in a different context. A long time ago, Caleb Hurst stood in the tree line. He had a conversation with himself that took approximately 30 seconds. The conversation did not reach the conclusion he had expected it to reach. He stepped out of the trees. The sound of his boots on the snow crust was tremendous in the quiet of the ravine, like an announcement. Like the mountain had decided to make the introduction for him, her head came up. In roughly 2 seconds, she had scrambled backward through the snow, both hands gone into the oversized coat, and produced a revolver that she was now pointing at his chest with both hands, and a grip that was shaking badly enough to concern him. Colt Patterson, pre-war model. The hammer mechanism on those revolvers was notorious for corroding in wet conditions. This one had clearly been carried against her body, which meant repeated cycles of warmth and moisture, which meant the action was almost certainly seized. Almost certainly, he stopped. He kept his hands visible, not raised, not an aggressive posture, just present and visible. He let her look at him. He let her read whatever she needed to read from what she saw. Don't. Her voice was stripped down to its essential components, raw at the edges. The voice of someone who had been conducting a very long internal argument and had arrived at a position they intended to hold. Don't take another step. I'm not moving, Caleb said. His voice came out rougher than intended. It had been doing that lately. Months of disuse had altered the texture of it, lowered it, slowed it, as if it had forgotten the rhythm of conversation and was relearning as it went. She didn't lower the gun, but she didn't fire either. Up close, closer now than 40 yards beneath the soot and the cold and the particular hollowness that settled into a face when food had been insufficient for too many days. She had a face that belonged somewhere better than this. Sharp at the jaw, pronounced cheekbones, dark eyes that were currently doing several things simultaneously, frightened and calculating and furious, in a calculation that told him she was not a woman accustomed to being frightened, which meant the fear was new, and the fury at the fear was authentic. "Who sent you?" she said, not asking. Demanding. Caleb looked at the gun. "That hammer's rusted shut. Try me. I am trying you. I'm standing here telling you the truth, instead of taking 3 steps left and making this conversation irrelevant." He held her eyes. "Nobody sent me. I live up the East Ridge. I saw your smoke from the game trail above." She stared at him. "Your smoke," he said again, "is green pine. It's visible from a mile in any direction, and it is not warming that cabin. It's filling it with carbon." Something in her grip loosened. Fractionally, involuntarily, he reached to his left shoulder, slowly, with deliberate visibility. He unslung the brace of snowshoe hares he'd taken that morning, 2 of them, dressed, ready, and tossed them into the snow halfway between them. They landed with a soft double thud, an offering that required nothing of either party. "Eat those," he said. "I'll leave dry kindling on the stump." He didn't wait for her response. He turned his back to her, a calculated act, because men who are preparing to attack don't turn their backs, and he needed her nervous system to receive this information before her rational mind could complicate it, and walked to a downed birch at the edge of the clearing. 4 swings of his hatchet produced arm-length pieces of clean, dry wood, the interior still pale and ungrayed. He stacked them on the stump beside her failed pile of green pine. "Don't come back," she said. Her voice was steadier now. "More controlled if I don't," Caleb said. "Without turn around, you'll be dead by Wednesday." He walked back into the tree line. He did not go home. He climbed to the granite shelf 30 feet above the ravine floor and settled in to watch. He told himself he was watching because it was the sensible thing to do. Because a person you had just approached under volatile circumstances should be monitored until the situation destabilized. Because there were practical concerns, the smoke that was still too visible, the wolves that would smell the blood from the hares, the structural situation with that roof that required a person with relevant judgment to keep track of. He was being sensible. She circled the hares for 10 minutes before she approached them. She kicked them first, one, then the other, apparently, to confirm they were what they appeared to be and not something else. Then she snatched them up fast, both hands. The way you grabbed something you were afraid of losing. She went inside. The smoke from the chimney changed within the hour. Cleaner. The chimney began drawing properly. She had switched to his dry kindling, or had separated the green wood from the dry, or both. The signal fire was becoming something more useful. Caleb sat on the granite shelf until the light failed, then he went home. He sat by his own fire in his own cabin and looked at the wall for a long time, and did not think about anything in particular, and was not particularly successful at this. The wall had one window. The window had a narrow sill. On the sill he kept a brass compass with a cracked crystal that still functioned correctly, a flat river stone he had picked up from the creek below. On the first morning he had spent on this mountain 6 years ago, and nothing else. He kept nothing on the windowsill that he did not have a reason to keep. He had become very precise about this. He went to sleep. He woke before dawn, as he always did. He went back down to the ravine. This time he didn't approach the cabin. He left things on the stump. 2 good cuts of venison wrapped in waxed cloth, meat he had been planning to smoke for his own stores. A tin box of dry matches, which were worth more than their weight in almost any mountain situation. A coil for perhaps 30 feet, which could be used in a dozen ways if the user had any ingenuity at all. He suspected she did. He retreated to the granite shelf and watched. When she opened the cabin door and found the stump, she stood on the porch. 3 boards nailed to 2 posts, barely qualifying for the word, and looked out at the tree line for a long time. The morning light was thin and gray, and it caught her face at an angle that made her look simultaneously very tired and very young, and this was not a combination of observations that Caleb Hurst had any reason to be making about a woman he didn't know, and so he looked at the ridgeline instead. He came back the next morning. More venison, a pound of dried beans in a cloth bag, enough calories to make a real difference over several days. A pair of wool socks, because 1 pair was insufficient for the conditions. And he had 3 pairs and could spare 1 without compromising his own winter preparation. He did not know when this became a routine. He only knew that on the morning of the 4th day, when he came down through the spruce and approached the stump with the morning's provisions, there was already something on the stump waiting for him. He almost walked past it. He had been scanning the tree line out of habit, checking the approach, and he looked down at the stump only as he was preparing to set his provisions down. A piece of birch bark, the outer layer stripped away to reveal the white interior, approximately the size of his palm. Someone had drawn on it in charcoal. It was his mule, August. The brown one. She had drawn him from memory, which meant she had seen the mule at some point when Caleb hadn't seen her, which meant she had been watching him the way he had been watching her, which meant she was better at moving quietly through terrain than her city boots suggested. The drawing was clean and economical, perhaps 15 strokes total, but the posture was exactly right. The specific way August held his head in cold wind, ears back slightly, shoulders braced, with the expression of palms, with the expression of an animal that was a pet situation was worth occurrence was worth investing attention in. Caleb looked at the drawing for a long time. He had not planned to take it with him when he left. He took it with him. He set it on the windowsill next to the compass and the river stone. He stood back and looked at the 3 objects arranged in a row, and then went to make coffee and told himself he was not thinking about it. He was not successful at this either. The next morning, he left 2 pairs of wool socks on the stump. 1 pair was insufficient. He should have thought of that the first time. The following morning, she had left another piece of birch bark. She had drawn the view from the Morrow cabin's single window, the ravine dropping away below, the slope rising on the far side, the line of the ridge against the sky. She had drawn it from inside the cabin, sitting at the window, which meant she spent long enough looking at that particular view to memorize its proportions and its light. Nobody drew what they had not looked at carefully. Caleb added the 2nd piece of birch bark to the windowsill. He had not spoken to another human being in 4 months before she pointed the rusted Colt at him. He had not expected that to carry any particular significance one way or another. The silence had been a deliberate choice, consistently maintained, and he had been satisfied with it. He was starting to notice the silence differently now, not as a clean absence, but as the space between 2 people who had not yet spoken. There was a difference. He was aware of the difference. He was filing the awareness of the difference in a category he had mentally labeled "Do not examine further," and was going about his days. He left a heavy canvas blanket, because the Morrow cabin's single wool blanket he had found there was insufficient for the temperatures they were having. A bone-handled hunting knife, because a woman alone in the wilderness in November needed a functional blade more than almost anything else. A small jar of rendered bear fat, which was the most practically useful substance on a mountain in winter. Skin protection, boot, waterproofing, fire cooking, fat, and which she would either figure out or she wouldn't. He suspected she would. On the 9th morning, the stump was empty, nothing from her. He waited on the granite shelf. No smoke from the chimney. No movement at the cabin door. Her boots, which she had taken to leaving on the porch, railing to dry overnight, were still there, which meant she hadn't left, which meant she was inside and not opening the door. Something settled in his chest that was not a feeling he had a precise name for, something with weight to it. He went down to the cabin. He knocked on the door, which was not something he had planned to do. He stood there with his fist still raised after the knocking, and considered what had happened to his carefully maintained policy, if not inserting himself into other people's circumstances. No answer came from inside. He opened the door. She was on the narrow cot against the far wall, lying on top of the blankets he had left, because she hadn't had the energy to pull them over herself. Her face was flushed in a way that had nothing to do with embarrassment or cold. He crossed the room in 4 strides and put the back of his hand to her forehead. High fever, mountain fever, probably the combination of prolonged exposure and whatever her body had already been fighting before he started leaving food on the stump. Possibly a secondary chest infection. The green pine smoke she had been breathing for the first several days would not have helped her lungs. He looked at the cold stove. He looked at the state of the cabin, the smoke staining on the walls and ceiling, the condensation that had frozen on the inner log surfaces, the inadequate single blanket situation he had already identified but not yet fully remedied. He made several rapid assessments and began working through them in order. He went outside and came back in with dry wood and built the stove fire up to a proper temperature. which took 10 minutes and produced genuine heat within 20. He boiled the cleanest stew he could find in the small tin pot he located on the shelf beside the stove. He checked her provisions. She had organized them even in the state she was in. He noticed, even alone and sick and frightened, she had organized the food and the supplies into some kind of deliberate system. He made willow bark tea from the strip of bark he carried in his coat pocket in winter, the same way he carried the extra cartridges and the folded oilskin. The willow bark would bring the fever down and address the pain that always accompanied it. He left the tea where she could reach it, went back to his own cabin, and returned with his heavy bearskin rug and 2 additional wool blankets. He arranged them around her without disturbing her position, layering the warmth properly, feet first, then core, then shoulders. He had not planned to stay. He stayed. He sat in the single chair the cabin possessed and watched the fever and made sure she kept water down when she was conscious enough to take it, which wasn't often. He built the fire higher than was technically necessary. He did not examine the question of why he was doing any of this with the rigor it probably deserved. He knew what he was. The answer was inconvenient. She talked in the fever. That first night he had expected this. High fevers brought things to the surface that people spent considerable effort keeping below it in normal circumstances. He had sat with men in fevers before, during the war, afterward during the years of the federal work, and he knew not to assign too much weight to what a person said when they were burning from the inside. He was not assigning weight. He was listening, anyway, because he was still aware of himself that 6 years on a mountain hadn't reached a man who listened carefully to everything. She said her husband's name once. Victor. She said it the way people said names they were afraid of, quickly, as if speed reduced the danger. Then something about a contract, something about a bridge. Then she started saying names, not one name, not calling for someone. Names, multiple names, first name and last name, spoken one after another, with the slow, deliberate cadence of someone who had practiced reciting them. As if she had memorized a list and was running through it in the dark to confirm she still had it. Caleb counted. He lost count at 8 and started over. 19. She said 19 names. He sat very still in the chair. She ordered them in a specific sequence. He could sense the intentionality of the ordering, even if he couldn't identify the principle behind it. The last name she said was Thomas Carey. And then, after a pause that contained something 17. He was 17. She went quiet. The fire made its sounds. Caleb looked at the small journal in his breast pocket. The one he had been carrying since Philadelphia. Never quite filling, never quite able to stop carrying. He took it out and opened it to a blank page. He wrote 19 names at the bottom. Thomas Carey, 17. He underlined it. This was not a conscious decision. He closed the journal. He sat with the fire and the names and the specific quality of the Highland sweat that existed on a mountain. At 3 in the morning, when nothing moved and nothing was required of you, and he did not sleep, and he could not don't stop thinking about what 19 names the Psalms memorized in order and recited nightly in the dark meant about the woman who sang them. He knew what it meant. It meant she was keeping them alive in the only location she could guarantee remained uncompromised, inside her own head. On the second night, the fever ran harder before it broke. She moved constantly, pulling at the blankets, saying things that didn't connect into sentences. He kept the fire, kept the water, kept the willow bark tea available, and waited. On the morning of the 3rd day, the fever broke. He was at the stove, boiling coffee, when he heard the sharp intake of breath that meant someone had woken up in an unfamiliar place. He turned around slowly, keeping his hands visible. She was sitting up. The bearskin rug pressed against her chest, her eyes moving rapidly around the cabin. Stove, ceiling, log walls, window him, reading the room the way he read terrain. Looking for the exits. You're in my cabin, Caleb said quietly. Your stove went cold 3 days ago. I brought you up the slope. You've been unconscious for most of those 3. Silence. You had a fever, he added. I know what I had. Her voice was rougher than he had expected from her, lower. stripped of whatever surface texture it normally carried. How long? 3 days. A pause. Did I? She stopped talk? He poured coffee into the second mug, the one he kept for no reason he had ever articulated to himself. Yes, he brought the mug to her and set it on the floor within her reach, close enough to take without effort, not so close as to require him to be in her personal space when she wasn't ready for that. He pulled the chair to a distance that felt appropriate and sat down. Caleb Hurst, he said. She looked at him for a long time, assessing. Margaret Whitfield, she said. Meg? He nodded. She picked up the coffee with both hands. The silence between them was not the silence he had been living in for 6 years, which had had nothing in it by design. This silence had things in it. Weight. History, the specific gravity of two people who were holding a great deal back. He let her have the coffee. Then, you said 19 names. She went completely still. Not the stillness of someone with nothing to say. The opposite, the stillness of someone with too much to say, deciding how much of it to hand over to a stranger, in whose cabin they had been unconscious for 3 days. You said them like you had memorized them, he said, in a particular order. Every night, she looked at the mug, at the steam rising off it, at her wrapped hands around its warmth. Clendenin Bridge, she said. October 1888. A pause. My husband owns the Whitfield and Northern Transport Company. There was a contract dispute with the county. The bridge carried 2 of his competitors' freight routes. If it failed before the spring contract renewal, another pause. The structural supports were cut. Deliberately, the maintenance crew was on the bridge when it was done. Caleb was quiet. 19 men, she said, the last one, he said. Thomas Carey. Something moved through her face. Real grief, briefly visible before it was controlled. He had been on the crew for 3 weeks. He was filling in for his father, who was sick. His father recovered. She looked at the single window. He was going to leave the crew after the holidays. He had already told the foreman. Caleb said nothing. Everyone was told. It was structural failure, she said. Inadequate maintenance. The county investigated and found. She stopped. They found what Victor's people made sure they would find. How do you know otherwise? She looked at him directly. Because I found the ledger. She reached the ruined coat hanging by the stove. He had hung it there to dry, an automatic courtesy, and worked at the inner lining with practiced familiarity, the movements of someone who had checked the same location many times under stress, confirming the thing was still there. She pulled out a small black book, black leather, water-stained, the size of a man's palm. The kind of object that wouldn't attract attention in a stack of papers. Victor keeps 2 sets of accounts, she said. The ones his investors and boards see. And these, she held it up. This is what actually happened. The contracts, the payments to the county engineer. The man he paid to cut the supports. She set it on the cot between them. A note in his own hand about the timing. He knew exactly which shift would be on that bridge. How did you find it? The bottom drawer of his document case sticks on the left side. You have to press down and pull at an angle. She looked at the book. I had been trying to open it for a month. I thought it was financial records he wanted private. Which it was. A pause. I read it in one sitting, put it back, went upstairs and sat in the bedroom for 6 hours. Then I decided how long ago. 5 weeks since I left the house. She looked at her hands. Victor doesn't know I have it. He knows I know something, enough to run. He thinks I'm running because the marriage became. She stopped. He thinks it's personal. It is personal, Caleb said. She looked at him. 19 names, he said. That's personal. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of something he hadn't had in a room with him for a long time. The specific weight of another person's reality pressing against his. He had forgotten what that felt like. He had forgotten it intentionally. He sent men, Caleb said. It was not a question, she nodded. Aldous Crane and a man called Bet Quincy, both former Pinkerton, dismissed for reasons the company didn't publicize. Crane is methodical. He will try to do this quietly and handle witnesses afterward. A pause. Quincy is different. Quincy does not do quiet. How close? I lost them in the Ohio Valley. 2 weeks ago, she looked at the window. I've been trying to reach someone who can't be bought by Victor's money. A federal inspector named Raymond Voss, posted in Washington. She stopped. Caleb waited. Voss was involved in a case 7 years ago, she said carefully, in Philadelphia, building a case against railroad investors for fraud. The case collapsed, but his reputation for integrity survived it. She met his eyes. I need to get this ledger to Raymond Voss. Caleb was quiet for a specific moment, the moment of a man who has recognized something and is deciding whether to say so. Philadelphia, he said. 1883, she looked at him. The railroad fraud case, he said. I know why it collapsed. Meg waited. Because I was the investigator who built it, he said. And the man I trusted most sold us to the other side the week before trial. The silence that followed was not empty and was not full. It was something else. The particular silence of two people who have just discovered they are less far apart than the surface indicated. Your name, she said. Caleb Hurst, yes. Voss mentioned. She stopped. Then. He told me that if the original investigator had stayed in the service, the Clendenin case would already be federal. He said whoever drove that man out had done the railroad companies a significant favor. Caleb looked at the fire. I wasn't driven out, he said. You left. I left. There's a difference, she said, between being pushed and choosing to walk away. There is, he agreed, but the outcome is the same, she said. Isn't it? He didn't answer. Which was, of course, itself an answer. He told her about the cabin structural situations, while the coffee was still warm. The ridge beam and its bow, the south wall. The distribution of snow load across a compromised roofline, and what that distribution produced over time. She listened the way she had read the room when she woke up. Absorbing. Cataloging. How long before the storm? She asked. 2 days. Maybe fewer. He looked at his own ceiling. Good timber, set right, built to hold whatever a West Virginia mountain winter could produce. That cabin won't survive it. Then I need to move before it arrives. You need to continue recovering, he said. 3-day fever following severe exposure. I know what my body needs, she said. I also know that Crane and Quincy have been on this mountain long enough to find the Morrow cabin. If they find it collapsed with no one inside, they'll look for where you went, he said. Yes, my cabin isn't on any survey map, isn't visible from the game trail, isn't where someone would look if they didn't already know to look. He stood. Can you walk? She stood. Slowly, with one hand on the wall for the first few seconds. She stood and assessed herself with the same clinical attention she had given everything else. Then she took a step. Then another. Yes, she said. Good. They left the Morrow cabin before the storm front moved in. He packed what mattered. Her coat. Inadequate but hers. The black ledger, wrapped first in waxed cloth and then in his spare oilskin, placed at the center of the pack, surrounded by everything else. He had not asked to carry it. She had handed it to him without discussion, and he had registered this without commenting on it. The climb took longer than it should have. The fever had taken something that wouldn't return in a day, and the slope was steep, and the snow was the worst kind. Crusted enough to suggest it would hold, and soft enough beneath to give way without warning. He went first, setting his feet in the places that would hold, letting her follow his line. She didn't ask for help on the slope. He didn't offer it when they reached the shelf below his cabin, and she needed to stop. Just a moment, one hand on her knee, head down. He stopped too and found something on the ridgeline to look at. Keep going, he asked, after a minute. Keep going, she said. He moved. She followed. Inside the cabin, she went directly to the window while he built up the fire. She looked at the slope below. The ravine barely visible through the spruce. The place where the Morrow cabin's compromised roofline showed its bow from this angle. You've been watching it from here, she said. Since the beginning. The smoke was visible from this window, he said. It was a practical concern. She looked at him. 12 days, she said. A practical concern for 12 days. The smoke was a practical concern for 12 days, he said. She looked at his back. Something in her shoulders eased, just slightly. The tension of someone who had been holding themselves rigid for a long time, beginning to consider the possibility of something different. She looked at the windowsill, the compass, the river stone, the 2 pieces of birch bark, her drawings, both of them. On the sill of a man who kept nothing he didn't use, she looked at them for a moment, then at him, and she said nothing, which was precisely the right choice, and which told him something further about her judgment. Outside, the sky was going the color of an old bruise at the edges. The storm was coming. Inside the cabin, it was warm. The blizzard arrived that night, without negotiation. It hit the way serious mountain storms hit. Not gradually, not with the courtesy of a warning shot, but completely and all at once. The wind coming off the high ridge with genuine intention, driving a wall of snow that turned everything outside the windows into a uniform, white nothing. The kind of weather that killed things without particular malice. That had always killed things. That would keep killing things, long after everyone who had ever observed it was gone. Calm, Caleb kept the fire. Meg slept in his bed, which he had insisted on, without making it into a conversation. He took the chair by the fire with his coat pulled over him, which was not comfortable and was adequate. He slept in pieces, an hour. Then woke to feed the fire. Then another hour. Then woke to listen to the storm and make assessments. The storm would run 2 days minimum, possibly 3. He could calculate the snow load on the Morrocal cabin's damaged roof based on the rate of snowfall, and he had calculated it, and the number he arrived at was not compatible with the structural integrity he had observed. Which was fine. She was here. On the second night of the storm, she woke at some point. He was already awake, and looked at the fire for a moment and said, "Voss, you said he can still be reached." "I know where he's posted," Caleb said. "Washington. Interior Department. Do you trust him?" He thought about this with the care it deserved. Trust was a word he had stopped using casually. It was a precision instrument, not a general-purpose tool. "He's not corrupt," he said finally, "which is rarer than it sounds." She nodded. "If the ledger reaches Voss," she said, "he can convene a federal grand jury directly, bypass the local circuit entirely." A pause. "Victor has purchased most of what's purchasable in this part of West Virginia. But he cannot reach a federal grand jury. How do you know what he's purchased?" She looked at the fire. "Because I was at the dinners," she said, 8 years at those tables. "I heard the conversations. I knew the names, the judges, the county officials, the people who owed Victor favors in one direction or another." A pause. "I just didn't understand what I was hearing until I found the ledger." Caleb was quiet. "There's a federal marshal's office in Lewisburg," she said. "We could try there first, before committing to the full distance to Washington." "No," Caleb said. She looked at him. "The Lewisburg office answers to the district circuit judge," he said. "The district circuit judge was appointed 18 months ago." He paused. "I read the Wheeling paper when I go to Sutton for supplies. Habit." The appointment was endorsed by a senator from Ohio named Garfield Pruitt, who has received significant campaign funding from Whitfield and Northern Transport interests for the past 2 election cycles. The quality of the silence in the room changed. "You've been living on a mountain for 6 years," she said. "I stopped working," he said. "I didn't stop paying attention." She looked at him for a long moment. "Then Lewisburg is compromised," she said. "Very likely. Which means we go directly to Voss, Washington, or wherever he can be reached. No local circuit. No official channels that Whitfield's money might already be in. That's a long way." "Yes." She was quiet. "You said we," she said. He looked at the fire. He had said we. He was aware that he had said we. He was aware of the precise moment when a decision that felt like it should require significant deliberation had apparently already been made somewhere below the level of deliberate thought. And he was now the kind of man who said we about other people's dangerous problems, which was precisely what he had arranged his life to prevent himself from being. "In the morning," he said, "I'll assess the weather." She nodded and went back to sleep. He sat by the fire and looked at the windowsill. Compass, river stone, 2 pieces of birch bark, the black ledger in its oilskin wrapping, which he had set on the sill without thinking about it when they arrived, as if it belonged there. He thought about Philadelphia. About walking into a federal building with evidence that should have been sufficient and walking out that afternoon with nothing. About the look on Raymond Voss's face. Not sympathy, not apology, but a specific helpless fury that Caleb recognized because it matched what he himself was feeling, standing in the lobby of a building that should have been the end of something and was instead only the end of his part in it. He thought about Clara, about the quality of fear that transforms out of self into something else when it persisted long enough, about the way it had hollowed her. He thought about 6 years on a mountain and whether 6 years was sufficient. He had thought 6 years was sufficient. He took out the journal, found the page with the 19 names, read them in the order she had said them. Thomas Carey, age 17, last on the list. The logic of the ordering was hers, and he didn't need to understand it to recognize that it was there. He closed the journal. He put it back in his breast pocket. Outside, the storm covered things, made the world smaller and more itself. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, without quite consciously arriving at the decision, he made a plan. Not the kind of plan you made to protect yourself. The other kind. The kind you made when you had decided a thing mattered enough to accept the risk of being wrong about it again. He had not made that kind of plan in 6 years. It felt surprisingly like something he remembered. The blizzard ran 3 days. On the morning of the 3rd day it stopped. All at once, without tapering off. The silence that followed was total. The specific, absolute silence of a mountain after a major storm. The world holding its breath, deciding what it was now. Caleb dressed and went outside. Old pewter sky lightning at the east edge. Snow chest-high in the open sections, knee-high where the terrain had given it some shelter. The ridgeline clean and white against the pale sky. Every tree on the upper slope carrying its weight of accumulated snow. The familiar landscape transformed into something unfamiliar and precise. He went back inside. Storm broke, he said. Meg was already awake, already at the table, with the ledger open in front of her, reviewing entries, reinforcing the copy in her memory against the possibility of losing the original, making sure she still had it. Crane and Quincy, he said. They'll need a day to break trail in this depth. Possibly 2. Then we move before they can. We move today, he said. She closed the ledger. I need to tell you something before we go, she said. He waited. Crane and Quincy are not coming to negotiate, she said. They are not coming to talk or persuade. If finds you have been helping me, he will not leave a witness. Victor cannot afford a living witness with your background. Former federal investigator who can identify the pattern and speak to the method. I know what Crane is, Caleb said, and I know what I am. Both of those things were true before you said them. She looked at him. You still said we, she said. I still mean it, he said. Something shifted in her expression. Something warmer than what had been there before. More careful, too. The warmth of someone who had learned to be careful with warmth because it had cost them before. He looked away. He went to the wall and began taking down what they would need. Winchester first. The Colt from the hidden shelf, spare ammunition from the cache beneath the hearthstone. He looked at the windowsill. The compass he left. He knew these mountains without it. The river stone he left. The 2 birch bark drawings he folded carefully and placed in the inner pocket of his coat, next to the journal with the 19 names. He did not examine why. Ready? He said. Meg Whitfield stood and picked up the black ledger. She looked at him with the dark eyes that had been doing several things simultaneously, since the first moment he had seen her, and which he had been deliberately not trying to read too carefully. Ready, she said. The door opened into cold air and white light, and the long specific silence of a mountain after a storm has finished with it. They went out into it together. Whatever was coming, but it would find them moving. The mountain looked different after a blizzard, not softer. People said that. Snow softens everything. Those people had not spent a winter above 4,000 feet. Snow didn't soften the Alleghenies, it clarified them. Stripped away the middle ground, made every line harder, and every shadow deeper and every sound carry further than physics seemed to quite account for. which meant tracks showed clearly in new snow, which meant Caleb stopped walking before they had covered 200 yards. She had learned, in the first hour, not to walk in his footsteps but to parallel them slightly. Better for the snowpack distribution, better for balance, better for not pitching face first into a drift. She had learned this without being told. He had adjusted his line and she had adjusted hers, and that had been the end of it. Now she stopped beside him and looked where he was looking, the Snowba, below the East Game Trail, disturbed not the chaotic disturbance of wind or falling branches, the specific compressed disturbance of deliberate movement, multiple tracks, and not recent. A thin skim of fresh powder had settled over the disturbance, which meant it had happened during the storm, or just before it broke. Caleb crouched, pressed 2 fingers into the snow beside the nearest depression and read the edges. Firm, set at least 12 hours old, the shape at the bottom, iron shoes, narrow gauge, city horses, not mountain horses, not one set of tracks 3. They brought the third man, Meg said stood. Or, Victor, came himself. Silence, he wouldn't. Then, less certainly, he doesn't handle things personally. He does when the stakes are sufficient. Caleb read the track origins. Down from the north, the long way around, deliberate. Someone who understood that the direct approach would be anticipated. They went to the Morrow cabin first. See where the tracks separate, she looked. The main track went northeast, toward the collapsed cabin. One set split off earlier and went west, toward the game trail below his cabin. They found your place, she said. They found the area, he corrected. Not the cabin specifically. It's set back far enough that you have to know to look. But they know someone pulled you out of the Morrow cabin. They're quartering the slope looking for where you went. How long before they find us? He assessed the sky, the temperature, the snow depth. Moving in this depth with city horses? 6 hours. Maybe 8. Then we moved now. We moved now. He agreed. He didn't say the rest of it. That moving through chest-deep post-blizzard snow with a woman 4 days out of a 3-day fever with 3 men on horseback quartering the slope was not a situation with obviously favorable outcomes. But staying was worse. The cabin was defensible against 1 or 2, not against 3 with patience and numbers. The ledger went at the center of his pack. He checked it twice and would check it again at the first rest stop. They went east. The first 2 miles were brutal and could not be otherwise described. The snow was thigh-deep in the open sections, and the crust held for half a step and gave way, which was the worst combination. The false confidence, followed by the sudden plunge, repeated endlessly, like the mountain was making a pedagogical point about the danger of assumptions. Caleb broke trail. He was good at this. 6 winters had taught him to read the snow surface, where the drift had packed hard, where the apparent firmness was hollow underneath, where wind scour made it safe and where sun exposure made it treacherous. He moved in a pattern that looked random and wasn't. She followed his line exactly, and he could hear her breathing change as the morning wore on. Working harder, staying quiet about it. He didn't slow down. She didn't ask him to. By the 2nd mile, she had found the rhythm of the bare paw snowshoes he had given her, the post-hole shuffle that distributed weight across the frame rather than concentrating it at the heel. She had never worn snowshoes before that morning. He had given her a 1-sentence explanation, and she had worked the rest out herself. That was its own kind of intelligence. They stopped at the granite shelf on the eastern edge of his regular territory. He looked back down the slope, white, clean lines, but in the far tree line, at the edge of vision, a flicker, motion or shadow. Here and then not here. He watched for a full minute. Nothing. Meg was sitting on the granite edge, breathing steadily through her nose. Her color was better than yesterday, but not good. Her eyes had already been on the tree line. I see it too, she said. Maybe nothing, he said. Maybe. We keep moving. Yes, she said, and stood immediately. No hesitation. Which was either brave or determined, and probably both, and he had started to understand that with this particular woman, those 2 qualities were not always distinguishable. They went east into the timber. On the afternoon of the first day, she raised the warrant question. Victor would have obtained a county warrant for her, abandonment of the marital home at minimum, possibly theft of company property, which meant every county sheriff between here and Washington was technically authorized to detain her, which meant no official channels below federal. "We need to be lucky," he said. "I prefer selective," she said. They made camp that first night in a rock overhang he had sheltered in twice before. Small fire, set back from the opening, dried venison and hard biscuit. "Snowmelt in the tin cup," she asked about Voss. He told her what he knew, that Voss had put his name in writing on a document contradicting Victor Whitfield's count of the bridge failure, which meant Voss had done the thing that required either integrity or stupidity, and Voss was not a stupid man. "That's the man I remember," he said. Then she asked what had happened after the Philadelphia case collapsed. He told her about Edmund Ferris, about 4 years of partnership, about Missouri before the service, about the week before trial and the evidence that disappeared, and the witnesses who died afterward, one by one, in the months that followed. About Voss's helpless fury in the federal building lobby. About Clara. "Clara," she said. 11 years, he said. "She never blamed you." "No," which was almost harder, he said. Meg nodded in a specific way that suggested she understood this from the inside. The particular cruelty of unearned grace, when you know. The grace is unearned and the person giving it doesn't. "She died in 1884, he said. "I'm sorry," he added wood to the fire. "I came up here in the fall of that year," he said. "Told myself a season, to think, to figure out what came next." He looked at the dark outside the overhang. "Seasons become years." She looked at the fire. "Victor and I married in 1881, she said. 8 years at those tables. Listening. Being useful in the particular way a wife is useful to a man like Victor." A pause. "I told myself I didn't know. For a long time I told myself that. But I think I knew. I knew the way you know a room is cold before you put your hand in it. I just didn't." "Look at the thermometer," he said. Yes, she was quiet. Finding the ledger wasn't a shock, it was a confirmation, which is worse, because shock means you didn't know. Confirmation means you did. "You ran," he said. "I ran." "That's not nothing," he said. "Plenty of people confirm the thing and stay." She looked at him. "Is that what you did?" she said. With Ferris, he had not seen that coming. She threw it flat and clean, and without cruelty. The way you threw something you wanted the other person to actually catch. He sat with it. "No," he said. "I left." Which isn't staying, but it isn't running toward anything either. It's just stopping. You stopped. For 6 years, she looked at the fire. "Well," she said, "you've started again." He had no complete honest answer for that. He didn't deny it, which was, he supposed, the same thing. The second day was harder. The snow was deeper on the eastern face. Wind accumulation, and the surface was hard enough to cut, but not to hold. The worst combination. They moved slower. He watched her face for the signs he had learned to read. The specific blankness, the shortened breath, the stumble that didn't correct fast enough. She was close to the edge. He called an early camp without making it a discussion. She didn't argue, which told him more than arguing would have south-facing rock face, afternoon sun, snow melted from the base. Bigger fire than he would normally risk. He made willow bark tea and handed it to her, and she took it without the half-second hesitation she'd had the first time. Just took it. He noticed the change and said nothing. "Thank you," she said. "For the tea," he said. "For the tea," she agreed. Her eyes said something else. He looked away. On the third day, he saw 2 riders in the valley below, a mile off, moving east, parallel to his route, quartering. He pulled her back into the timber with a hand on her arm, and they waited 20 minutes while the riders moved south. When they were gone, he assessed options. The detour north would add a day and a half. "Do we have a day and a half?" she asked. "If the weather holds, then we go north." The detour added 2 days. A washed-out section of trail had frozen into an ice shelf that required significant upslope work to get around. But they got around it. On the morning of the 4th, he woke before dawn with the specific feeling he had learned to take seriously. Something in the environment had changed. He sat up, listened. Wind? cooling fire, distant owl. The sound of snow falling from an overloaded branch when the temperature changed, and something else below them. On the slope, a horse. He had his hand on Meg's shoulder, light, firm, before the second sound. She came awake fast and quiet, the way people learned to wake when they had been afraid for a long time. Her eyes found his in the dark. He put one finger to his lips. She nodded. 3 minutes to pack in, complete silence. She had been watching him pack and unpack for 4 days and had learned the sequence. Right direction on the bedroll, cup inside the pack the right way. He poured snow on the coals. Fire died without sound. He took her hand briefly to show her the line, then let go and moved. They went north into the deep timber. The horse sounds receded. On the 5th day, they were halfway to the valley road. The confrontation happened in a clearing. Old logging operation, stumps still standing through the snow. Caleb came out of the timber on the north side and stopped. Quincy was standing in the middle of the clearing, not Crane. Quincy alone, which was wrong, big man. Bigger than Meg's description had suggested. Spencer, repeating carbine held loose at his side, not raised, not threatening, positioned for someone who was very comfortable with what came next. He had been waiting. He had read the terrain and positioned himself at the choke point, which meant he was more capable than Caleb had estimated. Caleb stepped in front of Meg without deciding to, just moved. Between her and the open ground. Hurst, Quincy said. Flat voice. Professional. She comes with me. You walk away. Nobody needs to know you were ever involved. Generous, Caleb said. It is, Quincy said and meant it. Mr. Whitfield has no quarrel with you. Who's the third man, Caleb said. Quincy. His eyes moved just for a moment. Caleb, the third man, was someone new. Someone Quincy hadn't expected or wasn't comfortable with, not Crane. Someone Victor had added. Hand over the pack, Quincy said. The conversation was over. The carbine came up, and Caleb moved not toward him. Left, using the nearest stump as cover while he cleared his own rifle. He was moving before the carbine was fully raised. Quincy was disciplined, wouldn't fire without a clean shot, and a moving target required time. The shot came. Hit the stump, he was no longer behind. He came up firing, first shot high, corrected, second into the snow near Quincy's position. Quincy moved to a larger stump, better cover. The Spencer was fast, 3 rounds in succession, walking toward Caleb's position. The third one caught him, a graze. Left forearm. He felt it as a line of heat, and then a specific kind of wrong that meant damage without structural catastrophe. His left hand went unreliable. He switched grips. Shot one-handed, braced against the stump, then from the south side of the clearing. The side he hadn't been watching, a sound. Specific. Deliberate. A branch, broken clean against a trunk. Quincy heard it too. His attention moved, fractionally. The carbine tracked south, 3 seconds. Caleb came out of cover low and fast, and what followed was close and ugly and loud, and ended with Quincy face down in the snow, wrists lashed, Spencer in the snow 6 feet away. He sat back in the snow and breathed. He looked at the south tree line. Meg walked out of it, carrying a branch about the length of her arm. She had broken it deliberately, against a trunk, sharp and clean. 3 seconds at exactly the right moment. She looked at Quincy, then at his arm, and her face moved through alarm and recalibrated into function in about 1 second. How bad, she said. Graze, he said. You're bleeding through the coat, long enough to travel. He said she was already pulling the coat sleeve back. Pine pitch and rendered fat from the small tin, cloth from the pack. Her hands were steady. She was not looking at the wound with fear. She was looking at it with the concentration of someone solving a problem that has a solution. There, she said. She tied the cloth. Not perfect. Effective. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me. Move, he left Quincy his coat and his boots and enough slack in the cord to eventually free himself. It was cold. It was not a death sentence. There was a line between what was necessary and what wasn't, and he had always known where it was. He picked up the pack. She looked back. The branch, he said. It seemed useful, she said. He turned east. She walked beside him. He noticed, not for the first time, that she had been walking beside him now, not behind him. had started doing that on the second day without comment from either of them. He hadn't changed his pace to make it happen. He noticed this. He filed it in the category he had been attempting to keep empty. The category was getting full. That night in the rock overhang, smaller than the first. Fire set far back, his arm aching in the way that meant tomorrow would be worse before it was better. The body's billing practice. Meg was looking at the fire in a way that meant she was deciding whether to say something. Say it, he said. She looked at him. You could have walked away. Even today, Quincy offered you that. Yes, why didn't you? He thought about this carefully. Because the warrant with my name on it told me that wasn't actually an option, he said. Quincy would have said whatever was needed to get the pack. Once he had it, witnesses are a liability. He paused. Men like Quincy don't leave liabilities. That's practical, she said. That's not the answer. He looked at the fire. You memorized 19 names, he said. She waited. A person who does that has decided the names matter more than the risk of keeping them. That's a decision I understand, he paused. I spent 6 years on a mountain because I decided one catastrophic outcome was proof that I should stop making decisions that affected other people. And then I found a woman burning green pine in November, and my body made a decision before my head could argue with it. Your body, she said. My body, he said, which has better judgment than I've been giving it credit for. She looked at the fire. I am glad, she said, that your body made that decision. So am I, he said. And that was the most honest thing he had said in 6 years, and he knew it as he said it, and he did not try to take it back. She looked at the fire, he looked at the fire. In the warmth, the small fire threw against the rock, something settled between them. Like snow settling after wind. Like the specific quality of quiet that followed something loud. On the 7th day, they cleared the mountain. The timber gave way to scrub, then open ground, then the valley road. Frozen solid, running east toward the distant suggestion of settlement. He stopped at the tree line. There's a way station 3 miles east, he said. Stage stop. Telegraph. Watched, she said, very likely, he thought. There's a farm, half-mile north of the station. A man named Giddings, federal courier before the war, retired. He still has postal connections, and he owes me a debt. What kind of debt, she said. 4 winters ago, I spent 11 days looking for his son. 12-year-old boy went out in a blizzard after a dog. Found him in a hemlock hollow 2 ridges north. Cold and frightened and alive. He paused. Giddings came up to find the body. He found the boy instead. Meg looked at him. You never mentioned that, she said. It wasn't relevant until now, he said. She looked at the road. There are things you do for other people without knowing yet why they matter, she said. And then they matter. He looked at her. She was looking at the road. Yes, he said, exactly that. The farm was modest. 2 buildings, a well, a barn, smoke from the chimney. A dog started barking from inside the barn and then stopped when it sorted out the smell. Dogs remembered him. He had never decided how to feel about that. A man appeared in the doorway. Late 50s, built like someone who had been lean for most of his life and had recently stopped having a reason. He looked at Caleb, then at Meg, then back. Hurst, he said. Giddings, I need your postal connections. Discreetly. Giddings looked at the arm. At the way Caleb was carrying it slightly wrong. The way you carried a hurt thing when you were pretending it wasn't hurt. Come inside, he said. Inside was the specific warmth of a fire that had been burning all day, settled into the walls and the furniture, and the air itself. An old brown dog came and smelled Caleb's boots and returned to the fire, Caleb explained. A message to Raymond Voss, Federal Inspector, Interior Department, Washington. And a second message to the editor of the Charleston Courier. A man whose paper had run 3 articles questioning the official account of the Clendenin bridge failure, which meant he was either brave or connected enough to matter, and Caleb was betting on the former. Giddings listened. Nodded. 2 days, Giddings said. By Ryder to Grafton. From Grafton by wire. There's a federal relay station there, not the county line. Whitfield's people won't have eyes on it. The wire goes direct to Washington? Caleb said. Direct, Giddings said. I used it twice during the war. Still works. That was the difference between 2 days and 12 hours, which was the difference between Voss making the morning train south and the one after it. 2 days, Caleb said. The messages go ahead of us. We keep moving, Giddings nodded at Meg. Ma'am, you need anything? I'm fine, she said. Thank you. He nodded at her with the specific respect of a man who could see that someone had been through something significant and was still standing and knew better than to make a fuss about it. They were back on the road within the hour. But first, Giddings's wife, a small, sharp-eyed woman who had not been introduced, but had produced food and coffee without being asked, took Caleb's arm while Meg was in the other room and looked at the bandage with professional eyes. She do this, she said. Yes, he said. Good job, she said, and re-wrapped it properly with clean cloth and a salve that smelled like pine and something unidentifiable, and which immediately made the arm feel considerably better. You've been up on that mountain a long time, she said, not accusing, not pitying. Just note, she said. Man like you, she said, ought to have somewhere to be. He looked at the window. I'm starting to think so, he said. 7 miles that afternoon on the valley road, before the light changed, and the temperature dropped, and they found an abandoned barn, roof intact, hay in the loft from a previous season, the warmth of old wood and old hay that was different from fire warmth and better in some ways. They ate. They were quiet. Meg was asleep before the last light went. Caleb sat against the wall with the Winchester across his knees and listened to the night, the third man. Still somewhere south. Too far today to be immediate, but distance was temporary. He thought about the messages Giddings was sending. He thought about the ledger in the oilskin at the center of the pack. He thought about Quincy's face when Meg walked out of the south tree line with the branch, the complete absence of the scenario he had calculated for. She was not a woman who fit inside the scenarios that men like Quincy built. He thought, this was probably the most important thing about her. He added it to the list of things he was not examining closely. The list had become unwieldy. He looked at the barn door. The dark outside. He thought about Clara, not the way he usually thought about her. The specific sharp grief, the specific moment, the specific smell of the room. He thought about her the way you sometimes thought about good decisions made long ago. The way you thought about the choice to trust someone. She would have told him to get off the mountain 3 years ago, 2 years ago. The first winter, maybe. She would have liked Meg Whitfield, he thought. Yes, he thought. She would have told him that liking someone and being ready for someone were two entirely different things. And then, she would have told him to stop thinking so much and go to sleep. He almost smiled. He did not go to sleep for another hour. He stopped thinking and listened to the night and kept the watch and let morning come the way it always came. Slowly, then all at once. On the 8th night, one day from the Valley Road's junction, with the main route to Charleston, Meg said his name, just his name, but in a way that made him look up from the fire. When this is over, she said. He waited. When the ledger is with Voss and the case is in federal hands, when it's done, she looked at the fire. What do you want? He thought about the mountain, the windowsill, the silence that had had nothing in it, and the silence that had things in it. The difference between them, I'm not sure yet, he said honestly. Voss offered you your position back, she said. After Philadelphia. He looked at her. How do you? He told me, in Washington. Before I found the ledger, he said the offer was still open, that you'd walked away from the service, but not from your judgment, and men with that kind of judgment were rare. A pause. He said he'd been waiting for you to come back. The fire moved. Voss always talked too much, Caleb said. She almost laughed. He heard the shape of it, the breath, the thing it nearly became. What would you do, he said. After, she thought about this seriously. As it deserved. I want to see it through, she said. The testimony. The trial. I want to say what I saw in that ledger, in a courtroom where it carries legal weight. She paused. And I want to find the families, all 19. I want to. She stopped. Tell them what happened, he said. Yes. Say their names, he said. Yes, she said quietly. He looked at the fire. Then we'd better get there, he said. Yes, she said. And that was the 9th day's promise. It was enough, the 9th morning. moving east on the valley road, in the thin gray light before dawn, the mountains behind them now. The country opening up, Caleb heard the horse at the same moment Meg touched his arm. Single rider, fast, from the south. Not quartering, deliberate, direct. He pulled Meg into the ditch, not graceful, just fast, and they were down in the brush, with the Winchester, up before the rider came around the bend. Aldous Crane. Alone, not pursuing. Moving like a man with a message. Horse hard-ridden, lathered. Crane himself leaning forward, with the posture of someone who had been in the saddle through the night. He pulled up. He looked at the ditch. His eyes were better than the early light warranted. Hurst, he said. Not aggressive. Almost tired, Caleb didn't move. I'm not here for the woman or the ledger, Crane said. Victor is dead. Silence. Meg made a small involuntary sound. Heart, Crane said. 2 days ago, in the Lewisburg Hotel. He'd come down himself to oversee the operation. The doctor said it was the second one, the first he hadn't told anyone about. The road was very quiet. The bounty is finished, Crane said. No one to pay it. Quincy is in Sutton with a wrist he says you broke. The third man went back wherever he came from when word got out. A pause. I'm going home. The warrant, Caleb said. County warrant dies with the complainant's estate. She can challenge it or ignore it. Either way, nobody's pursuing it now. Crane touched his hat, an old-fashioned gesture, almost courtly, and turned his horse south and rode away. Caleb and Meg stayed in the ditch. He became aware that she was very still beside him. Not the stillness of alertness, Meg, he said. I'm fine, she said. You don't have to be fine right now. She was quiet. He killed 19 people, she said. He was going to kill us, a pause, and I feel nothing, and relief, and then nothing again. I feel like I should feel something cleaner than this. He looked at the road where Crane had been. I know that feeling, he said. Do you, Ferris? The man who sold us out. He died in Denver in 1888. Influenza. I read it in the paper and I sat with it for 3 days and I kept waiting for something to resolve. A pause. Nothing, and then relief, and then nothing again. In that order, she looked at him. Does it change anything? She said. No, he said. The 19 are still dead. The ledger still exists. The families still don't know what happened. Then we still have to go, she said. We still have to go, he said. Victor Whitfield being dead didn't make the ledger matter less. If anything, it made it matter more. The only justice available now was the documented kind. The public kind. The kind where someone stands up and says it in a room where it goes on record. He climbed out of the ditch. She climbed out beside him. The road stretched east. They started walking together. Charleston was louder than he remembered, which was not saying much. The last time he had been in a city of any size was 1887, a supply run to Grafton that he had cut short because the noise had settled behind his eyes like pressure and stayed there for 2 days after he got home to the mountain. This was worse than Grafton Railroad City, River City. A city that had decided it was going somewhere and was making its decision audible. The streets were half-frozen mud and half-frozen ambition, and the people in them moved with the forward-leaning urgency of people who believed the next 5 minutes mattered more than the last 5 years. Caleb walked through it and kept his face neutral and told himself the noise was not personal. Meg walked beside him and appeared entirely unaffected. She had lived in cities. She understood how to move through crowds in a way that made you invisible. She adjusted her posture slightly as they reached the main commercial street. Chin up, pace steady. The coat, his second best, given to her on the mountain, was too big and too plain. But she wore it like it rather than a circumstance. He noticed this. He noticed most things she did. He had started to accept that about himself. The courier office was above a hardware store on 2nd and Summers, exactly where it should have been, in exactly the condition he would have predicted. Full of paper, in all stages of becoming or having been something. The smell of ink and hot metal, and someone who had been thinking very hard for a long time. Elwood was small, precise, and had the eyes of a man who had spent 20 years reading things so closely. He had lost the ability to look at anything without reading it. He looked at Caleb and read him. looked at Meg, and read her. Looked at the pack and Caleb was fairly certain. Read that too, Mr. Hurst, he said. You know who I am, Caleb said. Voss telegraphed 3 days ago. Said a man named Caleb Hurst might come through my door with something worth reading. A pause. He said you'd be skeptical, and that I should tell you the word was Gettysburg. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Gettysburg was what he had said in 1882 when Voss asked him why he had joined the Federal Service after the war. He had said, because I saw what happened when the institutions failed, and I decided to be one of the institutions. And Voss had asked when he made that decision. And Caleb had said, Gettysburg. The third day. Watching men die because someone made a bad decision about terrain, and nobody below them had the authority to say stop. Nobody else had been in that conversation. Voss is already on a train south, Satterlee said. Should arrive tomorrow morning. Voss had received the Giddings message inside 2 days and had not waited for confirmation or procedure. He had gotten on a train because Voss had been waiting. As Meg had said, for something to move, Caleb unslung the pack, unwrapped the oilskin, set the black ledger on Satterlee's desk. Satterlee looked at it for exactly 1 second, without touching it. The look of a man who has been expecting something for a long time and wants 1 full second of just looking before the work begins. Then he opened it. 2 hours. Satterlee read with a pencil and a notepad and asked 3 questions, specific and technical, which Meg answered with the precision of someone who had bent over the material many times in her own head. Caleb watched the street from the corner. His arm hurt. Sitting was better than standing. Watching the street was at least a function. He listened to her voice behind him, steady, clear, laying out the argument she had been constructing in her head for months, finally giving it to someone who could do something with it. She was very good at this, he thought. She was always going to be good at this. The years at those dinner tables, listening, filing, understanding the architecture of complicated men's plans, had been preparation for exactly this room. She hadn't known that when she was living through it. She knew it now. That was its own kind of justice. At the end of 2 hours, Satterlee set down his pencil. I can run this tomorrow morning, he said. Front page, federal case. First, Meg said, if it runs before the case, Whitfield's estate lawyers will seek an injunction on the ledger as company property. If Voss has a grand jury convened first, it's federal evidence, and the injunction can't reach it. Satterlee looked at her. You've been thinking about this for a while, he said. Since October, she said. If Voss convenes by noon, run it tomorrow afternoon, she said. Late edition, he agreed. He looked at Caleb. I'll need the ledger overnight. Caleb looked at Meg. She nodded once. Keep it in the safe, he said. Not the desk, the safe, Satterlee agreed. The River House was not elegant, which suited Caleb precisely. Elegant hotels had doormen who remembered faces. The River House had a desk clerk who preferred $4 to names. 2 rooms. Adjacent. This had not been a discussion. He asked for 2 rooms and she didn't suggest otherwise. He stood in his room, small, plain, bed and washstand, and a window that looked at the wall of the adjacent building and looked at his own hands his arm was holding. The ache had shifted from sharp to deep, which was the right direction. He was fine. He sat on the edge of the bed. He was in a hotel room in Charleston with a ledger in a newspaper safe 2 blocks away, and Raymond Voss arriving on the morning train and 19 names in a journal in his breast pocket. Fine. He was absolute. The ceiling was very close. The room was very small. After 9 days in the open, the walls were aggressively present. He was not used to walls. He put his hands on his knees and breathed. Outside, city noise, horses, voices, someone laughing, the clanging rhythm of a city that didn't stop when the light went. He had done difficult things before. He had sat in worse rooms with worse problems and gotten to the other side. He was capable. He was a knock on the wall. Not the door. The wall between his room and hers. 2 knocks. Pause. 1 knock. He had no idea what that meant. He knocked back once. Can't sleep either? Her voice, muffled through plaster. No, he said. The walls, she said yes.
I say, keep thinking I can hear the wind.
But it's just the street, I know. He said 9 days, she said. And now we just wait. Until morning, he said. Until morning, she agreed. He could hear her shift on the bed. The sound of someone settling but not sleeping. Caleb, she said. Yes. When Voss asks about the mountain, she said. About how you found me. About the 12 days before the storm. I'll tell him what's relevant, he said. What is relevant? He thought about this, that you had the ledger and the sense to run with it, he said, and the judgment to survive long enough for the evidence to matter. That's very practical, she said. It's accurate. It leaves some things out. Most accurate things do, he said. A longer pause. Good night, Caleb, she said. Good night, he said. And the walls stayed close, and he lay in the small room with the journal on the nightstand and looked at the ceiling and thought about Raymond Voss on a southbound train and 19 names and the morning that was coming. And whether he was ready for it, he was not sure, but he had stopped waiting to be sure before he moved. He'd learned that somewhere on a mountain in the snow, between the first crunch of boots on snow crust and the east side of everything, he closed his eyes. He slept. Voss arrived at 7:43. Caleb had been on the platform since the station opened because there was a limit to how long a man could profitably stare at a hotel room ceiling. The posted schedule said 7:15. It was optimistic. He saw Voss before Voss saw him. Voss had aged. 10 years did that. Broader through the middle now, hair gone entirely white. A slight forward lean in his walk that was new. The weight of the work resettled on his frame. But the eyes were the same, quick and specific, carrying the quality of a man who had learned to treat everything as potentially relevant. Voss stepped off the train, looked along the platform, found Caleb, stopped, looked at him for a moment. You look terrible, Voss said. Train travel agrees with you, Caleb said. Something that wasn't quite a smile, more complicated than a smile. 6 years, he said. Caleb agreed. Voss looked at the arm, at how it was being carried. Tell me later. The ledger, courier safe. Satterley has it. Voss produced a folded document from his coat. Federal authorization for grand jury proceedings. Signed by Circuit Court of Appeals, bypassing the local circuit entirely. I wrote the request the night I got your message. The judge signed it the next morning. You moved fast. You moved faster. He tucked the document away. Mrs. Whitfield. At the hotel, Caleb said, ready to testify. She memorized it, Voss. In case the original was lost, Voss looked at him. Memorized. She spent 3 weeks on a mountain in a collapsing cabin in November, maintaining a second copy in her own head. Just in case. A pause. All right, Voss said. Let's go meet her. They met at the courier office. Satterley, Voss, Meg, Caleb. The ledger on the table, and beside it the handwritten copy like Meg had been making that first morning in the cabin. Before the fight, before the mountain. Finished somewhere on the road. Without mentioning it to him, Voss looked at both. You copied it, he said. The critical entries. I can verify under oath. Voss recalibrated visibly. The look of someone who came expecting one thing and is encountering another. Walk me through every entry relating to the Clendenin Bridge decision, he said. Starting with the first relevant date. October 3rd, 1887, she said, without hesitation. Let's start there. She started there. Caleb sat against the wall and watched her work and did not interrupt and did not need to. By noon, Voss had what he needed, and then he had something else. A thin folder produced at the end of the meeting, set on the table, with the weight of something that had been waiting. The Whitfield estate has been under informal federal observation for 14 months, Voss said, following the Clendenin inquiry that went nowhere locally. In that time, we identified 6 additional incidents across 3 states bearing the same structural signature. The room was very quiet. How many people? Meg said. 31 additional deaths. 31. Added to 1950. Meg pressed her hands flat on the table, both palms, the way you pressed against something to confirm it was real. He kept records of all of them, she said. We believe so, Voss said. The ledger covers his primary operations. There may be additional records in the subsidiary companies. That's what the grand jury will determine. 50. And Thomas Carey, who was 17, who was one of 50, who had been going to leave the crew after the holidays. One of 50, Meg stood. Walked to the window. Stood there with her back to the room for a long moment. Then she turned around, not devastated, resolved. Harder and clearer than before, like something had burned off the surface, and what remained underneath was solid and load-bearing. "We need all 50 names," she said, "before the case goes to grand jury. The families need to know before they read it in a newspaper." Voss started to say something about federal investigators. "I'll do it," she said. "Mrs. Whitfield. I was in that house for 8 years," she said. "I sat across from Victor at breakfast every morning. I knew what he was, and I stayed longer than I should have. The least I can do is look those families in the eye and tell them what I know." Caleb looked at her. He thought about the 9 days, the 19 names in the fever, the porch of the Giddings farm, looking east with her jaw set and nothing wasted in her expression. He thought, "Yes, of course, we'll need federal standing," he said. Everyone looked at him. "Estate lawyers will move the moment the story breaks. She'll need official authority to approach the families without interference." He looked at Voss. "Can you arrange that?" Voss looked at him for a moment. "I can arrange that," he said. A pause. "And something else. Open. Federal investigative consultant. Corporate fraud. Suppressed evidence." "It's been open approximately 6 years." The room waited. Caleb looked at the table, at the window where Meg had stood, at the journal in his breast pocket. "Tell me the scope," he said. "Cases like this one. Cases that need someone who knows how to find what people have hidden." A pause. "And who can't be bought." "Half-time," Caleb said. "I keep the mountain." Voss blinked. "I beg your pardon." 6 months on, 6 months off. "The mountain is non-negotiable." A careful pause. "I will see what can be arranged." Satterley, to Caleb's left, was examining a spot on the wall with intense concentration while maintaining a studiously neutral expression. Meg by the window was looking at him. And she was almost smiling, that almost smile, the one that had been coming further each time. This time it arrived, brief and real and unperformable. 6 months, she said. 6 months, he said. "That's very specific, by every specific person," and that landed. The almost smile became the full version. "The kind that happened to you." Voss looked between them. "Half-time," he wrote. "Mountain non-negotiable." He looked up. "Anything else?" "Adequate expense reimbursement," Caleb said. "My boots don't resolve themselves." "Right," Voss said. The grand jury convened at 2. Caleb had not expected to be in the room. Grand jury proceedings were not public, but Voss had requested him as a material witness for evidence handling and chain of custody, so he was there. 12 people in a box along one wall. A federal judge, Honorable T.R. Atchison, brought specifically from the Circuit Court in Washington. A court recorder, Voss presenting. And the ledger in the center of the table, looking exactly as small and plain as it had always looked. Meg testified for an hour and 40 minutes. He had seen her with Satterla. He had seen her with Voss. He had thought he knew how she was going to do this. He had not known. The word he found for it, later, was certain. Not confident. Confident was something you performed. Certain was what you were when something had stopped being arguable and simply become true. She told them about Victor, about the ledger, about October 3rd, 1887, and every entry after, about the night she read it, about the decision she had made, about the mountain and the cabin in the cold, about the names. And then, prompted, not in response to a question, "I would like to read the names into the record." The judge looked up, all teen. "By name. I would like them in the official record of this proceeding." A pause. That is, the judge looked at Voss. "Irregular," Voss said. "Also," he paused, "I have no objection." The judge looked at the jury, then at Meg. "The witness may proceed." She read them 19 names. First name, last name, slowly, clearly. In the order she had learned them, not alphabetical, not chronological. The order that lived in her memory, and was therefore hers. Thomas Carey, last Thomas Carey, 17 years old. The room was very quiet when she finished. The quiet that was not about procedure or law, or the machinery of federal justice. The quiet that was about something older. The quiet that happened when something that had been invisible was finally formally, publicly seen. Caleb sat in his chair and looked at the table. He had the journal in his breast pocket. He did not take it out. He didn't need to. The journal stayed where it was. The names in it were the same names she had just spoken into the federal record. They didn't need to be in two places anymore. One place was enough. One place was more than they had ever had before. The grand jury deliberated for 2 hours and 20 minutes. They returned with an indictment, multiple counts. The Clendenin Bridge, the 5 additional incidents, conspiracy, fraud, criminal negligence on a scale that required legal terminology Caleb wasn't entirely familiar with. The Whitfield estate frozen pending full investigation. Subsidiary companies subject to federal audit. The families of all 50 would be formally notified within the week. Satterley would have his story. Voss would go back to Washington with the ledger and the testimony and build the largest corporate fraud case the Interior Department had attempted in a decade. It was done, or rather, it was beginning. Courts moved slowly. Estates fought hard. The subsidiary companies had lawyers and strategies and the capacity for delay. But the indictment was real. The record existed. The names were in it. That was not nothing. That was the furthest thing from nothing. They stood on the furthest thing from nothing. Cold up steps of the federal building. Cold afternoon light. City noise ongoing. A bell ringing somewhere. Church or rail, impossible to determine. Voss had gone back inside. Priestley, his clerk, with him. Satterley had gone at a near run. Just Caleb and Meg on the steps. She had her hands in the pockets of his too large coat, looking at the street. Her face had the quality of someone who had been running toward something for a long time, and had now arrived, and was not yet sure what arriving felt like. He knew that feeling. He had felt it in 1883. Different federal building, different steps. Except then it had ended badly, and this had not ended badly, and so the feeling was adjacent to that one, but not identical. Something newer, years, she said. The trial. The estate proceedings. The families. Years, possibly, probably. Years, he said. The mountain, he said. It's going to need maintenance after the winter. The west side of the root cellar, Caleb. The wood supply needs to be, Caleb, not sharp. The precise opposite of sharp. The voice of someone who had decided something and was done being careful about it. Stop talking about the root cellar, he stopped. He looked at her. She was looking at him. Those eyes. The ones that had been doing several things simultaneously since the moment she pointed the rusted Colt at him in the snow. Except now they were only doing one thing, just looking at him. Directly. Without the caution she had kept around herself like a second coat for 9 days. Ask me, she said. Ask you what, he said. Whatever you've been not asking, she said. For 9 days. He was quiet for a moment. He thought about Philadelphia, and 6 years in Clara, and the windowsill with the birch bark, drawings, and the journal with 19 names, and the specific silence of a mountain at 3 in the morning when you couldn't sleep because the silence wasn't empty anymore. He thought about stepping out of the tree line. When you go to find the families, he said. The 50. She waited. You'll need someone who knows how to find people, he said. Who knows how to approach people who have reason to be suspicious of anyone with federal authority behind them. He paused. Someone who knows the terrain. I will, she said. I know some of that terrain, he said. West Virginia, Appalachian, Pennsylvania, parts of Ohio. 6 years on a mountain isn't the same as knowing nothing about how people live in these places. What they need before they trust someone enough to listen. No, she said. It isn't. So, he said. So, she said. I could. He stopped. She was not going to help him with this. He could see it clearly. She was going to stand on these steps in his too large coat and wait for him to finish the sentence, and she was not going to rescue him from finishing it, which was, he realized, precisely right. Some sentences you had to finish yourself. I could come, he said. For the first few, until you have the method settled and you know the ground well enough to work alone. Yes, she said. He stopped. Yes, she said again. Without hedges or conditions, he looked at her. I haven't actually asked yet, he said. You asked, she said. You just took a while to get to it. She looked at the street. I've been waiting for it, since the third dance on the mountain. He thought about the third day. He had been fairly certain he wasn't anything on the third day that required waiting for. He had been fairly certain he was just. He stopped. He had been on the third day walking slightly faster than necessary to stay ahead of her, choosing the better path instead of the adequate one. Calling an early camp because her color was wrong, and not saying so because saying so would require acknowledging that he was tracking her color. The third day, you could have said something, he said. I was waiting to see if you'd figure it out, she said. In 9 days, he said. You figured it out in 9 days, she said. For someone who has been avoiding human connection for 6 years, that is. She stopped. What? He said. Impressive, she said. In its way, he looked at the street. I'm not good at cities, he said. Or crowds. There are things that are still I know, she said. And I'm not. I know that too, she said. He looked at her. I am very good at mountains, he said. I know, she said. I've seen, and you have a great deal to do. Years worth, families to find, testimony to give, a legal process that will take time. I am also very good at planning for long timescales and not losing track of what matters in the middle of them. He nodded. So, he said. So, she said. And that was not a complete conversation by the standards of conversations. It was two people who were both skilled at understanding what lived, beneath words, deciding that words were sufficient for now, and that the rest would become clear in the doing of it. He was all right with that. He had learned in 9 days that some of the best navigation happened without a map. The late edition of the Charleston Courier ran at 4 in the afternoon. On Saturday had used the entire front page. The headline was simple and required nothing further. Wit, fouled fraud. 50 dead, evidence, substressor 2, and below it before the story began a list, all 50 names list. First name, last name. 2 columns, neat type. A quarter of the front page before the story started, Caleb stood on the street with the paper in his hands and read the names. He found Thomas Carey in the second column. Thomas Carey, age 17, Clinton, WV, 9th name down. In a list of 50. No longer in the order Meg had memorized. In the newspaper's order, which was alphabetical, but present, in print. In the public record of a paper that would be in every hotel, lobby and train station and general store in southern West Virginia by morning. He stood on the street and read all 50. He took his time. Tuan Dong. He found Meg in the hotel dining room. She had a copy of the paper, open to the front page, reading the list with the complete attention of someone doing something that required it and deserved it. He sat across from her. She looked up. All 50, she said. Yes, he said. She looked back at the paper. At the 2 columns. Satterley didn't have to do that, she said. The names. He could have just run the story. He's a good journalist, Caleb said. He knows what the story is. She turned the paper so it faced him. We did this, she said. Not triumphant, not performed, just factual. Hows. The way you stated something that had happened and needed to be acknowledged before you moved on from it. You did it, he said. You found the ledger. You memorized the names. You made it off the mountain. We did it, she said. He stopped, looked at the paper. Yes, he said, we did. The dining room was warm. The city noise came through the window, muffled, less aggressive from inside. Food arrived that he hadn't ordered but accepted. Coffee. Something hot with bread and gravy that was nothing remarkable, and exactly what was needed. They ate. They were quiet in the way of people who had been through something together and were now on the other side of it, and did not need to narrate their transition. Outside, the city kept moving, kept making noise, kept going toward whatever the next 5 minutes had to offer. Inside, the small dining room of the River House. 2 people ate a meal and were quiet, and did not need it to be anything more than that. 3 weeks later, the first family, the Carey house, was a small frame building at the edge of a hollow outside Clendenin, white paint going gray, a porch with 2 chairs that had sat in the weather long enough to belong to it, a kitchen garden gone to winter, the stakes still standing in the frozen ground, waiting. They rode up in a federal buggy. Caleb driving, Meg beside him, Priestley, the clerk in the back, with his leather case. A woman came to the door before they had fully stopped. 50s, heavy dark coat. The kind of face that had done a great deal of work and arrived at a careful steadiness that was not peace but resembled it under poor light. She looked at the buggy, at Meg, at Caleb. Caleb stepped down first, walked to the porch without hurrying. Took his hat off. Mrs. Carey, he said. My name is Caleb Hurst. This is Margaret Whitfield.
We've come to tell you what happened to your son.
She looked at him, and then she opened the door wider. Come in, she said. I put coffee on when I saw the buggy. They went inside. The Carey house smelled like pine soap and old wood, and something baking in a far room. There was a photograph on the mantelpiece. A young man in work clothes standing straight, squinting slightly against the light. Not a formal portrait. Someone had caught him on an ordinary day. Thomas Caleb looked at it for a moment. Then he sat down. Meg sat across from Mrs. Carey at the kitchen table and set the ledger down. Not opening it, just placing it, and said, I was married to the man who ordered the work done on the bridge supports that day. I found the evidence. I brought it to the federal government. A pause. I am here because you deserve to hear it from someone who looked him in the eye. Mrs. Carey looked at the ledger. Then at Meg. Did he know, she said. About Thomas. That Thomas was going to leave after Christmas. Meg was still. I don't know, she said honestly. His records noted the crew present on each shift. Whether he read the names individually, she stopped. I don't know. Mrs. Carey nodded slowly. It wouldn't have mattered to him, she said. Not a question. The answer to a question she had been living with for 2 years. No, Meg said. I don't think it would have. Mrs. Carey looked at the photograph. He was going to buy a horse, she said. He'd been saving since September. He had almost enough, I know, Meg said. I read it in the records. Mrs. Carey looked at her. You know about the horse? Yes. Something shifted in Mrs. Carey's face. A long, slow movement. Something that had been held rigid for a very long time beginning, very carefully, to ease. Nobody knew about the horse, she said. I told the county investigator and he wrote it down and she stopped. I never saw it in any record afterward. It's in the federal record now, Meg said. His name. And the horse, she paused. I made sure of it. The kitchen was quiet. The coffee bubbled on the stove. Outside, the hollow was cold in the way. West Virginia hollers were in February. The specific held-breath quality of a deep valley in winter, where the cold settled and waited, patient and not particularly unkind, just very old. Mrs. Carey stood up, went to the stove, poured 3 cups and brought them back and set them down without asking about cream or sugar. Then she sat down and she looked at Meg and she said, Tell me everything. And Meg told her all of it. From the beginning, the ledger and the mountain and the 9 days and the federal proceeding and the late edition of the Courier with 50 names on the front page. Not edited, not softened. Everything exactly as it had happened. What Mrs. Carey was owed, because was Meg Whitfield had decided, somewhere on a mountain in a blizzard, that the people who deserved the truth were the ones who had been living without it. Caleb sat by the window and drank his coffee and looked at the photograph on the mantelpiece and did not say anything. He was not needed for this part. This part was hers. They visited 28 families over the next 3 months. Some doors opened immediately. Some took time. 2 never opened at all, and that was the right of the people inside them, and Caleb respected it without comment. He handled the roots. She handled the rooms. It turned out those were the things they were each built for, and neither of them had to explain this to the other. It was not justice. Exactly. Nothing was ever exactly justice when the people were gone, but it was closer to it than before. And for the families who opened their doors, it was the beginning of something they had not known. They needed a name for what had happened to them, spoken out loud by someone who had been in the room where it was decided. He came back to the mountain in the 2nd week of May. The snow had receded from the lower slopes. The trout lilies were up along the creek banks. The small yellow flowers that meant the mountain had decided to be alive again after considering the alternative for several months. The ridge looked, for the first time since autumn, Like something that had made a choice, he came back alone, which was how he had always come back. The cabin was as he had left it. Undisturbed. Root cellar intact. Firewood under the shelter. August in the corral. Well enough. He had arranged for a neighbor in the valley to come up twice a month. The gray mule, too. Both of them. He stood in the doorway for a moment. The inside smelled of old smoke and pine and the specific dusty cool of a closed space in spring. He went in, built a fire, put water on for coffee, stood at the window and looked at the ravine below, where the blue spruce were showing new growth at the tips, bright green, against the older dark, sharp and clear in the morning light. The Marrowbohuben site was not visible from here. The snow had covered it through winter, and the spring had erased the outline, and there was just the ravine and the spruce and the creek, which he could hear but not see. Good sounds. Old, his sounds. He looked at the windowsill, the compass. Still there, the river stone. Still there, the 2 birch bark drawings. Still there. And beside them, he had sent them up with the neighbor, with instructions to place them on the sill. 2 things added since he left: a folded piece of paper, his own handwriting, the 19 names, copied clean from the journal onto good paper, and beside that, a new piece of birch bark. He didn't touch it immediately. He poured the coffee. He sat in the chair. He picked up the birch bark. She had drawn the federal building in Charleston, the steps. 2 figures on the steps as seen from the street, one very tall, one considerably smaller, both looking at the street below and the cold afternoon light. She had gotten the proportions right. She had gotten the posture right. The specific way he stood when he was deciding something. The specific way she stood when she had already decided. He looked at it for a long time. Then, he set it on the windowsill, beside the other 2. Calm Pass, Riverstone, 3 birch bark drawings, and the 19 names on good paper, which would become 50 when he copied the rest, which he would do today, because all 50 deserved to be on that windowsill, in the same hand on the same paper. He drank his coffee. Outside, the mountain was doing what it did in May, coming back to itself, completely and without fuss, the way it did every year, without asking anyone's permission. He had 6 months, and after that more families to find, more roads to navigate, more of the slow necessary work of making sure the truth got to the people it belonged to. Voss had accepted the half-time terms, in writing, with adequate expense reimbursement. The mountain was not negotiable. Voss had accepted this after some initial blinking. The mountain was not going anywhere. Neither was the work, and neither. He had not asked her outright, and she had not said so in those exact words. But they had been corresponding since Charleston in a way that had started formal and had gradually become something else entirely. Neither was Meg Whitfield. He had a letter from her in his coat pocket. Arrived last week. He took it out now. He read it. It was mostly about the Marsh family in eastern Kentucky. Eli Marsh, 41, wife and 4 children, working the bridge crew to save for a farm. When Meg had told them what really happened, the wife had sat very still for a long time and then said quietly, "I always thought it was our fault for needing the money," Meg had written. That sentence has been with me every day since. The way blame settles on the people who were harmed when the harm was done to them but deliberately. I do not know how to fix that, but I know that naming it is the beginning of fixing it. He read it twice. Then at the very end of the letter, one more paragraph. I haven't thanked them about the mountain. You mention Ond. The trout lilies come up in May. I have never seen a West Virginia mountain in May. The Charleston work will be finished by the 3rd week. I could ride north from there, if the Giddings have room, or if there is somewhere nearby. He set the letter down, looked at the window, looked at the ravine. He thought about the Morrow cabin in the ravine, the collapsed roof, the rotted ridgepole, the potential, with good timber and 3 weeks of work, for a serviceable 1-room structure with a proper roof line and a south-facing window. He had good timber. He had 3 weeks before the 3rd week of May. He had 2 mules, one named August and one he had been intending to name for several months and had simply not gotten around to. He read the last paragraph again. He set the letter down. He stood up. He went out to the corral. He looked at the gray mule. The gray mule looked back at him with the mild, slight judgmental expression of an animal that had been waiting for something for a long time and was not entirely sure the human involved was going to figure it out. "Margaret," Caleb said. The mule's ears moved. "That's what I thought," he said. He got his tools. He went down into the ravine. He had work to do. The trout lilies were up along the creek by the time she arrived, exactly as he had described them. She came around the south bend in the game trail, on the bay horse she had bought in Charleston. Sensible animal. Mountain capable in the way city horses were not, and stopped where the cabin came into view. Not his cabin, the one in the ravine. New ridgepole. New roof, half finished, but standing and solid. The south wall restoned properly. A window where there had been none before, because a window was not negotiable. And it was placed correctly on the south-facing wall to catch the afternoon light. The afternoon light deserved to be caught. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked up the slope. He was on the porch of his cabin. He had been there for approximately an hour, having calculated her arrival time from the Giddings farm based on the tree conditions after the spring thaw and beneath the pace of a tonsable horse on uncertain ground. Thus he was 12 minutes later than he had calculated, which was well within acceptable range. She rode up the slope and stopped at the edge of the clearing. "The cabin," she said. "Needs work," he said. "Flooring, interior finishing. A month. Maybe 6 weeks." "You started without asking," she said. "I started without asking," he agreed. "That's very." She stopped. Presumptuous, he offered. "I was going to say something else." "What?" She looked at the cabin, at the new ridgeline against the sky, at the window, not perfectly framed, he would acknowledge, but functional, and placed where the light would be best. "It's exactly what I would have asked for," she said. He nodded. "I know," he said. "I've been paying attention." She looked at him. He met her eyes. "Since November." He said. She was quiet for a moment, then she dismounted. She led the horse toward the corral, where August watched with his habitual mild interest and the gray mule. The one now named Margaret watched with something considerably more invested. Meg stopped when she saw the name carved into the corral post. He had done it in January, when her letter from Charleston was 3 weeks old and he had been fairly certain, but had wanted the marker anyway. She read the name. She turned around. He was still on the porch. She had the almost smile, the full version. The version that reached everywhere it was supposed to reach. "You named the mule," she said. "She needed a name," he said. "After me, you were the obvious choice," he said. She named herself, really, by being what she was. She shook her head slowly with the expression of someone who has encountered a logic they find simultaneously exasperating and precisely right. "Caleb Hurst." She said. "Yes," he said. "You are." She stopped. "What?" he said. She looked at the mountain, at the ridge catching the afternoon light, at the trout lilies along the creek. She could hear the creek now. The specific sound of spring water over cold rock that meant the mountain had decided to start again. She looked at the unfinished cabin in the ravine. She looked at the gray mule with her name on the corral post. She looked at him. "Exactly what I didn't know I was looking for," she said. The mountain held its breath. Or perhaps that was just the wind dropping, the way it dropped in the valley in the late afternoon. The air settling into the kind of stillness that preceded something. He stepped off the porch. He crossed the clearing. He stopped close enough that she had to look up slightly to look at him. "I have a letter to Voss," he said, accepting the position formally. "I haven't finished it. What terms are still unfinished?" she said. He looked at her. "I need to know," he said, "whether the 6 months here are just mine, or if they're—" He stopped because that was the sentence he had been not finishing for 6 months. 6 months. In letters, and in the space between letters, and in the long evenings on the mountain, when he looked at the windowsill and thought about trout lilies in May, and the specific sound of spring water over cold rock. "Say it," she said. "You asked me the first time without knowing you were asking. This time you know. So ask." He looked at her face, at the dark eyes doing one clear thing. "Are you staying?" he said. She was quiet for exactly 1 moment. I have nowhere else I'm supposed to be, she said. That's not. I know it's not a full answer, she said. Here is the full answer. She took 1 step forward. I am staying, for as long as staying makes sense, which I believe will be a very long time. And when the work calls us away, we go, both of us, and we come back, both of us. He looked at her. Both of us, he said. Both of us, she said. The creek was still moving, down in the ravine. The unfinished cabin stood in the afternoon light, waiting for its flooring and its interior finishing and its first winter with a proper roof. August watched from the corral with his habitual mild expression. The mule named Margaret watched with considerably more interest. The mountain was the mountain. It had been the mountain before any of this, and would be the mountain after all of it, and it did not require human validation to remain exactly what it was. But it was better with 2 sets of footprints in the snow. Everyone who knew the mountain well enough understood that Caleb Hurst understood it now. He held out his hand. She took it, not tentatively, not with the caution of someone uncertain about what came next. Directly and completely, the way she had done everything since the moment she pointed a rusted Colt at a stranger in the snow and decided in the end to lower it. They stood like that for a moment, the mountain around them, the spring coming up through the cold ground, slow and certain, the way it always came. The 50 names in the federal record in Charleston and in the official transcript of the grand jury proceeding and in the newspaper archive, and in the memory of a woman who had decided that some things were worth the cost of keeping, and on good paper in careful handwriting on a windowsill on the east slope of an Allegheny ridge. All 50 now, copied today, because all 50 deserved to be there. And Thomas Carey, who was 17, who wanted a horse, who was in 3 separate federal documents, and on the front page of a newspaper, and in the memory of his mother who had put coffee on when she saw the federal buggy coming up the lane, because she had always known the way you knew a room was cold before you put your hand out, that someone was eventually going to come and tell her the truth, present, still present, the way things were present when someone decided they would be. Caleb looked at the mountain. Then he looked at Meg. There's coffee, he said. She smiled. There's always coffee, she said. They went inside.